Ohio State's blown out the first 4 teams they played this season, and they're a few days away from blowing out Iowa too.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It's a crossover edition of Locked On Hawkeyes and Locked On Buckeyes. Myself, Trent Condon, joined by Jay Stevens as we get ready for the big matchup. We thought maybe this was going to be a top 20, maybe top 15 matchup. Well, Iowa did what Iowa does at times and loses to Iowa State a couple of weeks ago. But it is still a big matchup in the Big Ten, and excited to get into it. Jay, good to see you once again. We're ready for this one once again. Hawkeyes and Buckeyes. I got family bragging rights on the line. This is always a fun matchup. We got memories of some great victories for Iowa. They're not very plentiful, but they're great memories for us. How you doing today?
I'm doing well, man. The one big thing about this game is that it's played in the shoe. If this was played in the black hole over there in Iowa, I would be a little bit nervous. We joked about that win Iowa had. What was that? Almost 10 years ago now, about 6, 7, 8 years ago. I forget exactly how long ago it was, but this game's played in Ohio. It's in Columbus, and so I'm feeling really good about that part of the matchup. But then looking on the field and the X's and O's and also just the stories of both teams, they're different. Both teams are talented, but Ohio State's talent is head and shoulders above what Iowa has right now.
There's no doubt about it. And, you know, the best team money can buy. In the past, that was a shot in college athletics.
Yeah,
now
it was.
It's just reality. And that's the reality that we're obviously going through at this point. So before we get too deep into things, as we got kind of both sides of the rivalry going up here, want to get your perspective just the season has gone for you guys. As you kind of put a cap on the first third of the season, haven't been pushed by any means. There's been a couple of shaky moments. A bad first quarter in week 1. Michigan State was able to move the football a week ago at times, but that's exactly it. Kind of as you put maybe a grade on the first third of the season, the way that you look at things and where the Buckeyes are with obviously those big national championship aspirations.
If I were to put a grade on it, Trent, I would give them an A. I'm not going A+. I'm a really tough grader. There's a reason why I won't give them an A+. But big picture, Ohio State's taking care of business. They have been able to do a lot of different things offensively. We all marvel at teams that can run the traditional triple option. Well, Ohio State's triple option of the RPO, when now you have a quarterback that's a legitimate run threat, that's something that I don't know if there's a defense in college football that can take that away from Ohio State. Iowa's defense is good, but I think Ohio State offensively will just be able to wear them down over time and be able to win by a big margin at the end of the day. Defensively, the defense is good. The rush defense has been the highlight of the safeties are two of the best safeties in the country. They're actually one of the best duos between Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs in the country as well. The weak part is the linebackers, and that's one reason why I don't give the Buckeyes an A+. Yes, you're undefeated, so you're automatically going to get an A there. But defensively, and you talked about it against Michigan State, but even the week before that, or I think the week before that against Marshall, both of those teams started to expose a little bit about Ohio State's secondary. The thing Marshall did was quick passes, 0-step and 1-step drop. Michigan State, on the other hand, they were getting Aiden Childs to move a little bit, getting him out of the spot. Ohio State wasn't putting a whole lot of pressure on him at times, and he was able to get chunk plays. So we saw in 2 games against opponents that aren't going to make the playoff, the Buckeyes secondary struggled early, but as the game went on, the Buckeyes just sucked the life out of both opponents.
Hopefully, from the Iowa perspective, it will be a step up. You know, for us this season, it's been at times frustrating. The defense has still been really good. The rush defense, as it is seemingly every year now, has been outstanding. And against Ohio State, obviously, you got to stop the run before anything else happens. We'll get into those talented wide receivers here in a moment. But you go back, and I'm sure a lot of Buckeye fans are wondering, well, how do you lose that game at home to Iowa State? They dominated the football game for 3.5 quarters, and it was one bad read, one bad play by Cade McNamara that really turned the tide on that one. I was up 13-0 at the half. It should have been 21-0. They had the ball twice inside the 3-yard line, only got 2 field goals out of that. And since then, they've changed things of what they do inside the 10-yard line and got with Brendan Sullivan, the former Northwestern quarterback, who's become their red zone quarterback, if you will, and taking over for McNamara. But McNamara up 13-0. They get a turnover. They get the ball in a short field. He just makes a throw that there was nothing there. He guessed instead of actually made a read. It was interception. A couple plays later, Iowa State scored a touchdown, and just like that, it was a ball game, and eventually Iowa lost that one. They dominated the game, but they lost it. And rivalry games, weird things happen. You guys know that also. Even in a game that you should win, it can go the other direction. I don't see it as some kind of indictment that this is not the exact same team that we saw come in, but this is an Iowa team that is still on the defensive side of the football incredibly good. They're going to stop the run. Their linebacker crew is as good as anybody in college football with what they have with Nick Jackson and Jay Higgins. There's talent on the back end of the defense, and Phil Parker is as good as anybody as a defensive coordinator of what they do. But really the conversation with Iowa this year has been about seemingly they've turned the page. And now this is an offense that at minimum is competent. And that's a step forward. We know the defense is good. We know the special teams are good. But what's been the problem the last couple of years against the elite teams? They haven't had any semblance of an offense. With what Caleb Johnson's doing, what this ground game is doing, they can now move the football. And if Cade McNamara is just okay through the air, Caleb Johnson has proven he can do it. It doesn't matter if it's an 8-man box. He's seen it plenty of times. In fact, he's averaging over 8 yards a carry this year against 8-man boxes. I know it's different against Ohio State. I know this is a much more talented team, but Caleb Johnson has proven it. And I don't know if you saw earlier this week during the player press conferences on Tuesday with Iowa football, he's an Ohio kid. And he had something, might be bulletin board material, but he said, well, even if Ohio State would have offered, he wouldn't want to go there because he likes to beat the big dog. He doesn't want to be the big dog. He wants to go out and be there. I'm not sure if it'll be on the locker room there on the bulletin board, but a little bit of motivation, I'm sure, for the Buckeye side there, an Ohio kid, maybe talking a little junk.
You know, I did see that, and I didn't go back and dive into why Ohio State didn't offer him. Was it the 3-star tag there? Well, Chris Olave was a 3-star, so I wouldn't buy into that if that was a narrative. But I don't know exactly what the thing was. I do know he probably wants a whole lot more carries than he would have gotten at Ohio State. Maybe Ohio State got a wind of that during his recruitment, and they said, we're not going to do it. We know you're an Ohio kid. He goes to Iowa. He's doing a great job of running the ball. As I was preparing for this show and for the game on Saturday, of course, you got to highlight the running back, a guy who's one of the best backs in the country. And I'm thinking, Ohio State has their hands full. I know how good the defensive line is, and Tyleik Williams should be back this week. So that's going to really fix the issues on the interior of the Buckeyes defensive line. Linebacker play, if Jim Knowles and James Laurinaitis, if they play the right guys at linebacker, that should fix some of that stuff there as well. But I also understand why he says, I want to beat Ohio State. If he said, I want to beat Ohio State in high school, it hits a little bit different because you're a high school recruit trying to go and play college football. You're the opponent that Ohio State is playing this weekend. So, of course, you're going to say, I want to beat Ohio State. But not picking them? That's a little weird to me. I literally did a show about that today and got a lot of traction about that one because that's generally not something you hear a recruit say. If Ohio State offered me, I wouldn't have picked them. Man, please, if I'm a recruit, I could be the number one kid in the country. If I get an offer from Ohio State, that means something. But he's like, I wouldn't have picked them. Okay, cool. Like, bulletin board material, I don't think they need anymore. I think they're fired up anyway. Plus, when you got that quarterback at Iowa that was at Michigan that started the whole 3-game losing streak against the Wolverines, that's fuel enough. But, hey, Caleb Johnson start talking. He put some stuff out there for the Buckeyes to use as fuel, and I hope they do it on Saturday, man. I really hope that the run defense, which has been a bright spot for the Buckeyes all year, really says, oh, you one of the best backs in the country? We're going to shut you down today.
So I'm an old timer. I'm an old guy now, and I remember very vividly Tavian Banks, a great running back for the Hawkeyes back in the 90s, played a long time in the NFL, a knee injury, cut short what I think would have been an even better NFL career. But Tavian Banks came into the season. He was on fire. First 4 games of the year, he was leading the country in rushing. He rushed for 314 yards in one game against Tulsa. He went up there, and then he ran into Andy Kutzenmoyer and the rest of that Buckeye defense. It did not go very well for Tavian that day. And unfortunately, from my perspective, I could see something very similar happening here. Speaking of that, Jay, we're going to get into the game a little bit more. And if I was going to hang around, if this turns into a 4-quarter game, I kind of want to get your perspective, and I'll give you my perspective of what it's going to take for Iowa to actually make this a football game. And I think a big part of it is not Caleb Johnson. Yeah, he's probably going to have to break one. He's probably going to have one of those big runs in there somewhere. but it's going to have to be a whole lot more because, as you said, this rush defense for Ohio State's been very good. They're currently, fourth in the country in rush defense, just over 60 yards per game. It's going to take more. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. We'll get into this game a little bit deeper and some perspective of what it's going to take for us actually to be entertained by the time we get into late afternoon as the sun starts to descend on Saturday. It's a crossover edition of Locked On Hawkeyes and Locked On Buckeyes. We continue here in a moment. Stay right there. Today's episode of this Locked On crossover edition is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get the hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Having that information there is oh so important. Seeing if your eyes that you're watching on the TV actually agree with what the numbers say. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's right, $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Currently right now on the Iowa-Ohio State side, 19.5 is the number. 44.5 is also the over-under total. If you're looking at some team totals, I'm taking a look at the Iowa perspective. 12.5. Well, I've watched a lot of bad Iowa offense lately. That one doesn't seem too bad on that one. Get a hunch in the middle of the game and place your first bet on FanDuel. $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you first place your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Back with you once again here on a crossover edition of Locked On Hawkeyes and Locked On Buckeyes. Myself, Trent Condon, joined by Jay Stevens as we go through and take a look at the matchup that we have coming up this weekend with Ohio State and Iowa from the shoe. 2:30 kickoff Central Time, 3:30 Eastern. So, Jay, I've been to Columbus a couple of different times. I was there in 2005. That was after Iowa obliterated the Buckeyes in 2004. Drew Tate was spiking the balls. He was getting sacked all over the field. That was ugly. I was there in 2009, the de facto Big Ten championship game, before we got the Big Ten championship game. An absolute epic, went to overtime. The Buckeyes ultimately prevailed here. So the question becomes, if I was going to hang around, from your perspective, what's it going to take? If we're sitting there going into the fourth quarter, Buckeyes, oh boy, we got a ball game here. What in your mind would Iowa have to do, or maybe Ohio State have to do poorly for this to turn into a four-quarter game?
So my first thought with this is look at the Iowa Hawkeye offense. Everyone knows who's going to get the ball, who's going to be the focus that Ohio State's defense is focusing on. Cade McNamara is going to have to do some things himself if Iowa wants to keep it close, have a chance to win. I don't think Iowa, if they win the game, is going to win by 10-plus points. I mean, literally a one-score victory is probably where you're going to find 7 points or less, because Iowa's just not – the team's not made up to blow out a team like Ohio State. Ohio State's also just too good for that. So I think it's going to be more Cade McNamara. What can he do with his arm? I don't think he's able to do that much. I don't even think it's Kirk Ferentz's the offense that's going to hold him back. I think Cade McNamara holds himself back himself. If Ohio State's able to get penetration on the pulling guards and tackles, as I'm watching and I'm seeing what Iowa's doing, it's not just 5 guys or 6 guys or 7 guys just going straight hat on a hat and moving the line. These big boys are moving over there in Iowa, and so they are opening up lanes for Caleb Johnson to move and to run, and he's a very patient runner, and he's also great. If he gets hit in the backfield, he's probably not going down. That's one of the best things I find about him is his yards after contact. At the first contact, I don't know the exact number, but I guess it's over 300 because he is just one of those guys. You get your hands on him, you better wrap up and squeeze and not let go, because if you don't, he's getting right past you. I still have to go back to Cade McNamara. I do that because he has to. You're not going to beat Ohio State with one dimension. Other schools have tried. Marshall is more of an offense that tried a little bit. Michigan State was trying to do some things, both in the air and on the ground. Didn't work out. Iowa's going to have to figure out something through the air. I don't think they're going to be able to, Trent. I don't think I think you're probably thinking the same thing, that even though it's Cade McNamara, he has to do a lot of things well, maybe play the game of his life for this to actually be an Iowa victory. Neither one of us believe he's able to do that.
So In Iowa lore, the 2017 game, 55-24, that's going to stand there for a long time. I mean, that's going to be remembered for Hawkeye fans, certainly as long as I live. And I know I'm not alone on that one. Well, people remember the tight ends were a dominating performance in that game, but also a big part of that is what happened in the first play of the game. JT Barrett picked off pick six. Amari Hooker went the other way for a pick six. I was probably going to need something like that. They're going to have special teams. They have to dominate. They're going to have a defensive score. They're going to have to do it, but it's not going to be in that kind of game. I think if I was going to go in there into Columbus and at least hang around, it's got to be low scoring, slugfest, that kind of game where it is Caleb Johnson. And instead of that 3-yard gain, it turns into a 6-yard gain.
Yeah.
Instead of an 8-yard gain, he gets 18 on that play as he breaks a tackle, and you're just eating up the clock. Iowa can't play toe-to-toe with Ohio State and try to beat them in a 60-minute football game. But if you kind of condense it down and make it like a 45-minute football game, yeah, maybe something goofy happens there. Look, I'm not optimistic that that's going to happen. And the reason that you brought up is Caden McNamara, his ability. He's going to have to do some things. We just haven't seen that ability out of him over the last year and a half. He is so limited as a thrower at this point. The injuries have really piled up, and we've seen it a lot of times throughout the course of this season, even dating back to last season as he was playing injured before eventually the ACL tear. He's so limited physically. You'll see him throwing off his back foot a ton. He's not confident to step in those throws. Caden McNamara has never been a guy that's known for arm strength. That is not his strength at any means. And now you take a guy that is limited arm strength, and now he's not confident stepping into all of his throws. You get into things. And then when you're talking about that defensive backfield, the quickness that Ohio State has on the back end, that's a recipe for a disaster. Look, if I was going to hang around in my mind, I think it's going to be Caleb Johnson not running for 200 yards because that's ridiculous. It's going to be like a game where he runs 32 times for 117 yards, something like that, where it's just grind it out. We get a little bit of Jazzion Patterson, his backup running back that looked really good 2 weeks ago in Minnesota, the last time out for them. Something like that. You get a defensive score or a short field after an interception or a fumble. I mean, those are the kind of things that are going to happen. You're asking for a lot. I mean, we're really talking about threading the needle here. That's how Ohio State is. But here's a question kind of going a step further. If we would get to that point, Ohio State hasn't been tested. I know this group has a lot of, obviously, confidence coming back after last season and what these guys are. You go to Ohio State, you have obviously a lot of background here. But if it does turn into a 4-quarter game, could you see all of a sudden the Buckeyes maybe starting to tighten up a little bit?
Yeah, I could. I truly could. Not so much defensively tighten up. Well, it goes back to the linebackers. I can see the linebackers tightening up in a big way. I think offensively, though, the one question I had about Will Howard was, can he win the games with his arm? So far, he hasn't really been pushed to do that. He's been able to have 260, 270 through the air. He's also throwing a lot of short and intermediate passes where he's allowed his fast guys to get in space and to get a lot of yards after the catch. And this is one of those games where, Iowa's defense is going to be very, very solid. And you highlighted the two linebackers that are the top two tacklers for the Hawkeyes defense. Those two guys might be able to confuse Will Howard and force him to make decisions that he doesn't want to make. I mean, literally a week ago, he threw an interception. The ball was intended for Emeka Egbuka. When he threw the ball, I'm literally thinking in my head, who is he throwing the ball to? Because all I saw was Green. Green guy caught the ball. They didn't score. I think Michigan State did score on that drive because I believe they had a one-play drive and Ohio State was going to score. Interception was thrown. Will Howard, I don't know, man. I think this is a game where Will Howard can, but he hasn't shown it here. The luxury is you got Jeremiah Smith. If you didn't have any other receiver on your team, you got number 4. But with the other receivers on your team, no, you can't double cover him. If you double cover him, the guy's going to get drafted into the NFL. It's going to be one-on-one coverage. So I do think it's going to be up to Will Howard. They can win a game if it's tight late, but I'm a little nervous about that if it's Will Howard needing to make throws for the Buckeyes to win.
Got to get there from the Iowa perspective. And that's going to be the difficult part, obviously, about this for Iowa, is just to hang around for a while, make it a conversation. So one more thing for you kind of on this run is we're just talking about Iowa hanging around. I don't think any of us are optimistic that's going to happen. But if it does is I mentioned this earlier on Locked On Hawkeyes. The fan base here the last couple of years, and I don't think I'm alone, and I had a lot of people commenting about just this. When you guys think about probably Iowa, is you see the upsets that we pulled over the last 10, 15 years, and the last couple of years against the best of the best. Michigan in the Big Ten championship game 2 of the last 3 years. Last year against Penn State. When we played you guys a couple of years ago, it's just got so ugly. And that's just not Iowa football. It's not the Iowa football that we've grown accustomed to. And it was because the offense had grown so bad. And we had the idiot offensive coordinator, Brian Ferentz, who didn't know his ass from his elbow, and he was awful. And he didn't know how to game plan. He didn't know how to scheme. And when injuries happened, it just got worse and worse and worse. And now at least we feel like we have competency as an offensive coordinator. It's not the coach's kid. It's actually somebody that knows what they're doing in Tim Lester. And it kind of renews a little bit of that hope. We're not as talented as you guys. The likelihood is if this is a standard 60-minute game, you're going to win and win comfortably. But if something goofy happens, you just hang around. You just never know. And I feel a little bit of that from the Iowa fan base right now. If we can just get back to that, make a play, have McNamara make a pass. All it is. How about Luke Lachey? Dad's up there in the radio booth watching down, and all of a sudden up the seam, there goes Luke for, a big yardage one. We go back to 1987, one of the few times that I was won. Marv Cook going up and making the game-winning touchdown in that one. If we go back to way back in history to do that, and you get that, that's been so beaten out of the Iowa fan base here the last couple of years because the offense has been that bad. And it's not to say that they're great by any means right now, but can they at least be confident? That's one part of this that gives that glimmer of hope. It's not a big hope by any means, but something to keep an eye on. Well, Jay, we got a lot more to talk about here as we break things down. We're going to make our predictions of this football game. And I got a basketball question for you as well, as we got a lot of crossover. Speaking of crossover here with Iowa and Ohio State basketball, and some things going on right now with the McCaffrey family from the Iowa perspective, and your former coach there with Thad Matta. We'll talk about that. Get ready for a little basketball as we wrap up here and give our predictions for the game. This is a crossover edition. It's Locked On Hawkeyes and Locked On Buckeyes. Back with you one final time on Locked On Hawkeyes, Locked On Buckeyes, a crossover edition here. Trent Condon on the Hawkeye side, Jay Stevens on the Buckeye side. So, Jay, prediction time. And I told you before we started recording, look, I was trying last segment just to lay out all the different ways that it's going to happen. And Iowa hangs around. And I won't be surprised if they do. But eventually, Ohio State, I believe, is too talented. I look at just top it down. I'm looking for weak spots. The weak spots I come up with is, well, the linebackers are young. They're talented, but they're young.
Yes.
And Will Howard. Short of that, though, there just isn't a whole lot there. I see this being something in the range of 31-13, comfortable victory, maybe around that point spread, maybe 38-10, something in that range. I think Ohio State wins it and wins it relatively comfortably. I know there's a path for Iowa, but it's really hard to come up with it. Where do you see this game going on Saturday?
Kind of similar to the Michigan State game, where it has a weird feel early on, where Ohio State fans are kind of scratching their head saying, what is going on? Ohio State's probably going to have 20-plus points by the end of the first half. Iowa's going to have a touchdown. And Buckeye fans are going to have this feeling of, is Iowa going to pull this off? This guy's already got 75 yards in the first half. Mm-hmm. We know he's one of the best backs in the country. He comes in here, and Ohio State's not able to slow him down. He's building confidence going into the halftime. But I think a big defensive stop for Ohio State, similar to the Michigan State game, is going to be what's going to propel Ohio State to ultimately win this game 38-10. That's actually been my score prediction all week long. I do just think it's too much firepower. You have too many weapons on offense. Defensively, though, I am looking at the linebackers, and I haven't really done as much talk on Locked On Buckeyes as I need to about the linebackers, because with them being the weakest link, they are young, they are inexperienced. But I think Ohio State's trying to do some things with them right now that they shouldn't do. Just play your best guys. Like, you shouldn't just be rolling guys out there to get them reps right now, to get them game reps, to see how they perform on the film on Sunday. No, just go ahead and play the best guys. If you play the best guys, Ohio State should win this thing comfortably, even though I think Iowa's going to score a touchdown and a field goal. I still don't think that the Hawkeyes should ever feel comfortable with the game. It should always be climbing uphill, a very steep hill, and right when you think you're almost to the top, it gets even steeper, and you realize, oh, this thing is a whole lot higher and taller and tougher than I thought it was going to be, because Ohio State's just that good. Talent alone can win games, but I think the talent with the chemistry that Ohio State has right now is a formula that Iowa will not be able to handle.
One final thing on the football front is something that I know gains traction on the gambling front. As we talked about our friends with FanDuel, 19.5 currently the number, 44.5 is the over-under, is the look-ahead factor. And I know there's a lot of handicappers that make that a big part of that. We know what awaits Ohio State next week with the trip out to Oregon. It's hard to believe that they'd be overlooking, but we see it happen so many times in college football where it does happen there. Was that asked at all to the players this week? I mean, it almost feels like it's kind of one of those narratives that, you know, the beat writers are kind of looking for there. Do you sense at all that that could be a factor with obviously Oregon awaiting?
Yeah, it's realistically a factor. I don't believe that this team this year is looking ahead. Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, Jim Knowles, they're all focused on one school this week. However, the one look ahead thing is Michigan. I don't think the look ahead is going to be Oregon. I think the look ahead could be that 12th game of the year, Thanksgiving weekend, where you're looking ahead to that game, because that game's just completely different. But when it goes to looking ahead to Oregon, I don't think it's a look ahead. These guys are too seasoned. They've been playing too much ball to know that looking ahead could be disastrous in this current week. So I don't think it's really a look ahead factor there. The linebackers, though, we go to that youth once again. They are playing guys in Arvell Reese that hasn't played college football that long. Sonny Styles playing a new position. Cody Simon played a long time, but he's just a solid guy, not an elite guy. He is just solid. So there could be some of the younger guys that could look ahead. However, those younger guys are very, very mature. So if they happen to have a little look ahead feeling in them, I think the older guys, the old heads in the room will say, hey, this ain't that. You can't do that. Focus on the team at hand. This is a really good Iowa team. And if they happen to look ahead in the moment in the game on Saturday, I think we can feel it. I think we'll be able to see that and sense that while watching it, but I still think they're not looking ahead. Ryan Day's focused on Iowa, focused on winning this game. All his energy and effort is focused on that game on Saturday afternoon. And then after that, it's then turning the page to Oregon, a really good Ducks team.
One final thing for you, Jay. We were talking a little basketball before we came on. So you got Jake Diebler taking over there with Ohio State. We've butted heads here recently the last couple of years with basketball front. So yesterday, the preseason poll came out from the Indianapolis Star and the Columbus Dispatch with the media members that were there in Indianapolis. Buckeyes were picked to finish 8th. Iowa was picked to finish 11th. We've seen some fun matchups between these two teams. I look at both of the programs. I think both of them are kind of underrated coming into the season. I certainly think Iowa's going to be an NCAA tournament team. I think the Buckeyes are comfortably, certainly in the top half of this league. And I know it's a new conversation with 18 teams now in the league. Is there any buzz for Ohio State? I know football is king in Ohio. I get that. I completely understand it. And we have the same kind of thing here in the state of Iowa. But what kind of buzz do you guys have with the Buckeyes going into the season?
A lot of buzz right now. I had a lot of key transfer coming in. The names escape me because I'm so entrenched in the football talk right now. Had a transfer from Duke, a transfer from Kentucky. Both of those guys are going to start this year. Also had a transfer from South Carolina and Nietzsche Johnson, who started his college basketball career at Ohio State. So he's an Ohio kid, was a Buckeye, left and came back. But you also got Bruce Thornton, who was a preseason all Big Ten guy. And I do think he is a kind of lead guard that you need if you want to make a deep tournament run. Ohio State has not made it out of the first weekend of the tournament in a very long time. Holtman never did it. So you're going back to the Thad Matta days to realize when the last time that actually happened. I think Diebler's the kind of coach, if it's the vibe I'm getting right now of very intense. These guys are working very hard on the fundamentals and going the extra mile in practice. If that is sustainable, December, January, and February, and Ohio State does not fall into the same trap of losing almost every Big Ten game in January, Ohio State will make some noise. Not just make noise in the conference. I mean, nationally, they could easily be a top 25 team with a lot of momentum heading into the big dance. I'm not ready to say they'll make it the Sweet 16 right now. It's a big, bold prediction without seeing them play ball. But I think Deebo's the kind of coach that can lead them to make that happen this year.
Going to be a fun year. We'll see you guys on January 27th in this new edition of the Big Ten with 18 teams. And, well, make sure you don't finish towards the bottom or you won't be making your way to the Big Ten tournament. Hey, Jay, always fun catching up with you, talking some football and a little basketball here at the end. Should be an interesting one. I've told you, I've been to Columbus a couple of different times. Now, your fan base overall, I'll tell you, it's a little bit different. But I've been to Alabama, Tennessee. I've been there at Bryant-Denny. I've been there. I've been to every, outside of the newbies in the Big Ten, every Big Ten stadium. I've been to about half the Big 12. I've been to 4 SEC places. I will tell you, it has never been as loud as it's been there in Columbus. That place is absolutely crazy. Let's hope Caleb Johnson and company can keep you guys quiet this weekend.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to the game itself. Caleb Johnson, I think he's going to score the one touchdown. I think the Hawkeyes are going to score. The Buckeye fans are going to be wild and crazy and going to have a little liquid courage with it being a 3:30 in the afternoon kickoff there, Eastern time. But I do think the Buckeye fans are ready for this. They've been looking forward to a tougher test in the Big Ten slate. Danny Cannell made a comment in the offseason. I'm going to make this quick about Ohio State needing to play somebody with the pulse. He was correct. Their non-conference slate was weak. Buckeye fans are a little upset about it. Why? He was just saying what was true, and he was doing a betting segment about Ohio State who gets clicks. So, of course, he's going to make a big, bold quote about that. It's just what he has to do. But also, I think that when, as the Buckeyes start playing teams with the pulse, Michigan State has one. Iowa definitely has one. I think people are going to, around the country are going to see Ohio State's dominating not just the G5 schools, but even the good schools in the conference as well.
I think you're exactly right. I think Ohio State wins this one and eventually pulls away and gets the victory in the cover of that 19.5. Jay Stevens with Locked On Buckeyes. I'm Trent Conn, Locked On Hawkeyes. Thanks for making Locked On Buckeyes or Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Catch us again on Friday. We'll be both back with you on each of your podcast feeds. And thanks for being with us here today. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Until then, well, for Jay, he'll say go Bucks. I'll say go Hawks. We'll talk to you tomorrow.